The Smart Kart 2, built directly from the PSK2 plans, ready to use. I'm going to take it now and put it underneath the Paulk Smart Station. Before I do that though, we're going to jump in our time machine and build this one here together. I need some plywood. Sacrificial strips go on first to protect the bench from any cuts, and then the track saw does most all of the work. I will occasionally use the table saw for multiple narrow rips and cross-cutting the narrow rips on the miter saw. Done with step one, breaking down the plywood. It's how I always start. I have all of the pieces for the actual cart cut, 12mm pieces for the patterns. This is also 12mm, this is the base. 18mm are these pieces here. So that used half sheet of 18mm and left that over there. A full sheet of 12, this is what's left over. Step two will be to go ahead and make all of the patterns. I just find it's more efficient. I'm gonna do it a little different in this video because I'm bringing you along and showing you how to make the patterns. I'm going to jump in and make the pattern. Once I have it all made and ready to use, then I'm going to step back and tell you what I did. I still plan on going back over what I did, but a little voiceover pointing out a few things might be helpful. I take my time to make sure that the layout is right. I know exactly the dimensions that I need to do because I'm using the plans on my phone. I went to this a couple of years ago. I no longer print the plans to save the cost, but also I find the phone, having on a digital device that I can zoom in, is much more efficient. Plus I'm listening to a podcast from that same phone. So again, I always have it with me. So I would encourage you to consider not printing your plans. Here I am overcutting both with the miter saw and with the track saw. I'm not taking my time to make sure I get right up to it and leaving the bit. I'm cutting it completely away. I'm finding that this works great. Now, I didn't quite cut it enough, so you can see that I had to use my razor knife to clean up the corners. And also notice, not only is it the pattern for the router bit, but also for all of the screw holes. 10 minutes. It could have been faster, but I really take my time on patterns to get them just right. Not only do I have the outline for the router to follow with the bushing, but I also have the holes where I will be drilling for mounting bolts and screws. And I did not take my time to keep these corners tight. When I cut with the miter saw, I cut through past that point. In fact, I didn't quite cut enough. I had just a little bit left I had to take out with a razor knife. And then when I cut the long cuts with the track saw, I went beyond there as well. I used to take my time and slow down and come up short of my marks, and then I would take a pull saw and finish it, making my patterns look better. You can still do that, but I have found that this is just fine, and I'm comfortable with that because I know it's going to produce the same results. And again, my typical workflow, and what I recommend is take your time, make all of your patterns. But in this case, in this one example, I'm going to go ahead and make the cut with this pattern just to take you from start to finish to really understand the advantage of using a pattern. 18mm thick sacrificial strips. They're free. I've been singing their praises for years. They far outperform foam board or even these aftermarket bench dogs that elevate your work. They just work. Do yourself a favor. It's proven. Use it. Save your money and your time and your bench stop. If you haven't seen it before, that is pattern routing. How quick it was to make the pattern, 10 minutes. And then cutting the finished pieces with the router. Because it's 18mm, I didn't cut through all at once. I made 3, sometimes 4 passes to get a really clean cut. And you can see how nice that is. No overcuts, no saw marks. Piece after piece will be identical, which is the real magic. Now I'm going to make the pattern for the strut. The plans show the pattern at 752mm, which is the exact length of the finished cut. The way I designed the plans was to actually take the struts themselves, cut them to length, and make that angle on the miter saw. In this case, I'm going to change it so that I'm going to make my pattern again shorter by that 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters and have the router make the cut. You get the same results either way. I'm just rethinking this as I'm going through the plans. And if I ever redo the plans, if I find some other errors and I want to make corrections, and there's always errors, then I would change that. But you have your choice. You can either follow the plans exactly or do what I'm doing here. You'll get the same results. 752 is my finished dimension, so I'm going to minus 3 millimeters. Since the sides are cut at an angle, I did all my measurements off the long point on the bottom, squaring up for this and also getting the distance down the cut's going to be made. So I'll be cutting this on the miter saw on both ends just past this point, and then I'll be taking the track saw to cut this part out. I made a mistake. I had the angle set for that 1 degree off. Fortunately, I'm on the right side, so I can make it again. I get a chance to cut twice. This is pattern number 7 for the base. If I've got to expand something 3 millimeters to make the pattern so the final piece will shrink that much, then if I want to use a pattern to make that pattern, I need to double that number. So I need to make it 6 millimeters wider, taller. The plans are going to show you the pattern with what it needs to be. That's really what you're going to end up cutting. But when you do your layout, if you choose to do this method, you're going to lay it out offset 6 millimeters or 3 each way. This is what's going to take the time, is laying it out. I took my time. You can see double lines scribbled out just to make sure I got it right. And I checked and double checked. Now I have where these X's are, that's the material that's going to get removed. I did indicate end and middle, but actually it can be flipped over either way. The only reason for that is the drill hole layout. Going one way, that pattern continues off of the end of this, the pivot hole screws. The rest of it is an exact mirror. I can flip it over, spin it around, it doesn't matter. I can't really use it wrong. It's pretty easy to do. I don't need to spend a lot of time drilling and all of that. I just got straight edges and I've got little pieces. It's like putting a puzzle together. And I'm going to attach it all with a 23 gauge pin nail, just a headless pin nail. So I'm going to have a lot of little pins in it, but when I'm done, they'll pop off real easy, and I'll pull them out with dikes or side cutters. The plans show this at 5 7/8. The reason for that is the hole saw that I have is, the largest one is 6, and so when I use that for the pattern, it ends up being 5 7/8. I find that on the heavy loaded casters where they're heavy loaded, you get a little deflection and it's fine, it works. I've got it working on that one. But the wheel, when it's rotated around and it's a lot of stress on it, it gets really close to hitting that. And so I just want a little more clearance. So I went up and made this hole 6.5. If I had a 6.5 inch hole saw, I'd use that, but I don't want to round and buy that. So this is one situation where I will use the jigsaw. I figured out these pieces in the middle that will operate for 2 edges, the edge for the tab slot and also the edge of this center hole. These spacers, just rip these on the table saw to the exact width I needed to get to the other line, and then I cut them to length to go in between. So this one will go from tab to tab. I'll put that right on that line. And then I have a shorter one to go in between, same width, but a little shorter. And then the outside piece, actually I have these short pieces. These, I don't need much there, but I went ahead and made them a little bigger than I needed. They won't have much bearing. For the afternoon monsoons. This happens every day. I like it because it drops the temperature. It's 92 outside right now. It's warmer in here. Most of the time when I do pattern routing, I use a 1/2 inch upcut spiral solid carbide bit with the appropriate bushing, which gives me that 1/16 of an inch or 1.5 millimeter offset per edge. I do that because the bit is really strong, lasts a long time. It's the best value and gives me the cleanest cut. Sometimes I follow up with a smaller bit, a 1/4 inch bit with the appropriate bushing. It doesn't take away any more wood, the same 1.5 millimeters or 1/16 of an inch, but it's a smaller radius, so it tightens up the corners. And now I have a pattern that will take care of both ends. Not only does it take care of all the holes, I took the time to lay out the pilot holes for the screws where I wanted them to go. And so when I'm attached to the base, I will take my drill bit and I will go ahead and drop it in and just make the pilot holes on both ends. And then I'll just have a few holes in the middle, which will be real easy to jump off the last one because I have a story pole stick. Do not underestimate the power of putting all of your pilot holes on your patterns. This saves an enormous amount of time and improves your accuracy. It's one of those efficiency techniques that I figured out a bit later in life, but I'm sure glad that I do it now. The time that I invested in making these 4 patterns, I recouped in making this very first Paulk Smart Kart 2 with them. Not only that, but I got a better end product because the multiple pieces match, and the layout of like these tabs is spot on versus if I tried to lay them out and cut them one at a time. All right, it is my 3rd router with my 3rd bit. This one's just for softening the edges. Could use a round over or, like me, a 45-degree angle cut. I made 2 mistakes on the base. Can you see what they are? Actually, I made 1 mistake twice. And I'm going to show you how not to make the mistake. This is something that I'm very familiar with. When you get into production, which is what I'm all about, I want systems, efficiencies, lean, put the thing on autopilot. Now you're familiar with this handle because I put it on all my benches. I don't need it over here. So I cut it here and I cut it there. When you have a pattern or anything that's going to let you go through and make repetitive cuts or holes or marks, give yourself a visual stop. Don't make it here. Like when I'm using my jig to make the cabinet knob holes, it has so many to adjust for all the different kind of knobs. If there's an extra hole, put a piece of tape over it. And then when you're making your cuts, you won't make the mistake. And then when it's time to go there. What you see me doing here is taking a piece of 1/2 inch material and ripping it to the width I needed, and then cutting it on the table saw so that it was only a 1/4 inch thick. I had 1/4 inch material, but I wanted to show you how to make it out of the material that you had so you didn't have to buy extra. But if you've got 1/4 inch, just use that. Assembly time. I'm using glue on every piece as well as the appropriate screws, countersunk. I started by assembling the boxes for the wheels. Those are the strut boxes. And then I'm doing a little rounding over, and actually in my case I'm using a beveled edge, little 45, barely breaking the edge just so I don't have sharp corners that get banged around. And then just assembling as I go, gluing and using the screws just like the plan shows. And I'm putting together the sides and the 2 strut boxes first, and then I'll follow up with the 2 ends. And the ends I already drilled the holes for the straps. And so that gives me the complete framework assembled, glued, and ready to accept the bottom or the base. Here I'm putting in 2 little blocks. Those blocks are temporary, they're not glued or screwed. They just keep the spreaders or the strut boxes spread apart so that as I put the screws in through the bottom, they won't be, you know, sort of drifting off of their straight line. I'm making one change from the current plans because of an experience I've had with the prototype. The washer in the plans going to the inside and then the nut I'm going to put that on the outside. The wood is softer, and as I tighten the bolt, it pulls into the wood deep. By adding that, I think I'm going to add a little more resistance to that, so this washer is not going to pull in. But I don't want it sticking out to the outside. I don't want any metal rubbing on things. Forstner bit in the pilot holes, drill a shallow flat hole that the head of the bolt and the washer countersunk. If the detail works out and I like it, then at some point I'll probably update the plans and reflect that. But if you've got the plans now and you're watching the build, you can go ahead and make that adjustment. Final step, I am mounting the casters, the R8s, the smart casters. Did that little countersink so the washers will drop in. And then doing just the 2 bolts as I show on the plan, followed up by the screws. So it gives a really solid mount for those casters to ride on. Ready to use. If you haven't already got your plans to build a Smart Kart 2 for yourself, I'll put a link in the description of this video down below. Obviously all the other plans, the Smart Station, the Smart Bench, the Smart Wood Shop itself, and all the accessories that work with the system, you can order them, and as soon as you complete the order, you'll get an email from us and you can download them instantaneously, 24/7, 365. And if you've learned anything that'll help you in your carpentry and woodworking, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe so you won't miss the videos that we put out. Mahalo.